virtual sprint school. We're going to take you guys through a really fun journey. This is the part where we are starting to converge. Ali and I are going to have a lot of fun with you guys today. And it's going to be really interactive, so we hope you guys are ready to unmute your mic. We have a guest speaker by the name of Lucas, who we're going to introduce a little bit more as we get down into our slides, but we are just going to get going. So we're going to welcome you back. You guys remain the best. We are on week 4 out of 6. So we got some objectives for today. We got Lucas. We're going to be talking about comparable solutions. That's what Lucas is going to be talking to us about. We're going to be talking about crazy eights and brainstorming, and as well as we're talking about drawing and solution sketching. So the first thing we want to do is, Ali, you ready to do breakouts?
Let's do it.
All righty. We want you guys to talk about brainstorming. And in your group, we want to talk about why it usually sucks, or why, you don't get out of the brainstorming what you're expecting. So we've all been part of those meetings where we're asked to come and spend an hour or 2 hours, and they're like, oh, we want to hear your ideas, and we want to be innovative, or we want to change. And you get a little bit hyped, and then you enter it, and you're like, okay. It's kind of a bit of the same. So we want you guys to talk about that with your participants. Say hello, do a little bit of networking. Ali, you good to go?
We'll give you guys 5 minutes, all right? And you should be starting, just click on join the meeting, the breakout room. You should be jumping in. Lucas, are you able to join on a breakout room? Did you get a join button?
I can dive in. Sorry, I didn't know you wanted me to join.
No, why not? Hey, Design Lab.
Hey, Design Lab.
So I'll down it's recording.
Yeah.
And what we'll do is
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, sorry, I was having problem with my internet connection, so I just came out and came in.
I'll get you in. We'll get you a room.
Thank you.
So then I'll let you record it afterwards, Shailen. Like the upload on YouTube, I'll put it on a shared drive. You're on mute.
Good idea.
Hi, Christine. We're just doing breakout rooms. I'll put you in a breakout room right now. We'll just be closing in a couple of minutes, but I thought just why don't you join a breakout room? So I'll just assign you a breakout room right now. And just click join.
Will you be doing another breakout room later?
Yes.
Okay. How much time left in your breakout rooms?
I'm going to give another minute and then I'll get them the warning happen. Welcome back, Marcus. Welcome back, folks. Just people are trickling in. 10 more seconds, you all should be back in the main room.
That stage right.
All right. Josh, are you on mute? Okay, I think everyone's back. So what did people talk about? Anyone wants to just share why does brainstorming usually suck? I might just pick on people right now.
Do it, Ali.
Let's do it.
Just do it.
I'm going to go on Kelly Malik. Kelly, what did you talk about in your breakout? You might have to unmute yourself, Kelly. Okay, we'll try.
All right,
Alex.
I'm going to.
Yeah, so we talked about how sometimes with hierarchical or with the hierarchy, if there's certain people in the room that have certain titles, it can actually be quite intimidating for others, and it doesn't create that. It doesn't feel like it's a safe culture to speak up and give an idea, even if the idea is a bit out there. So, and then we just discussed the difference between virtual brainstorming and in person. So. In person, a good approach is to actually get rid of all the tables and people just sitting in chairs in a circle, because then you have to be engaged. You can't be a passive participant on your phone or whatever. And then we also discussed different work styles. So if you're more introverted or if there's dominating personalities in the room, sometimes it can make it difficult to really get all perspectives shared.
Yeah, those dominating personalities. Josh, you had the word hippos, right? So.
Yeah, the hippo. I think I've already mentioned it in one of our sessions, but that's that highest paid person's opinion. And they kind of, I don't want to say waddle, but they come into the room and they can totally axe an idea. And one of the things our group is talking about is that sometimes people with power can come in with, say, we're going to do brainstorming, but they have their own idea already in their head. So they're more so looking for the group to say, oh yeah, your idea is fantastic, rather than listen to everybody that's there. And it can totally kill a brainstorm. Like, talk about, you know, offering people an opportunity to share and then just axing it, which just kills morale and the energy within a group. So we try not to do that ever.
I'm going to pick on one more person. Samira, I'm going to unmute you and tell me, what did you guys talk about in your breakout? You there, Samira? Okay.
It's all right.
Audio issue, that's fine. Why don't we go to Graham? Graham, you want to unmute yourself?
Sure, I was in the same group as Kelly.
Okay.
And you kind of heard from us already, but we also talked about that level of trust that has to be built through setting that stage right off the bat, even having a group that knows each other at least a little bit so they can trust each other enough to say something that might not be acceptable to everybody.
True that, very true. All right, Josh, let's keep moving.
All right, so this is where we're at. Remember we said we're going to keep coming back to this picture. We are now diverged on our problem, and we now know that we want to start to, we've converged on a problem, and now we want to kind of diverge out and hear from everybody within the room. But we want to talk about the homework that you guys did, because we have seen some fantastic maps. So this first one came from Linda, and Lisa, sorry. And I seen you come into the room, but I want to ask you, what was this process like for you? Kind of going through this and doing a journey map real quick.
Well, as you can imagine, given the content that it was, you know, fairly emotional, trying to tap into those emotions, it actually made me really mad when I was doing it. And also the other thing that is more of a process comment than a content problem is that I ended up, because my handwriting was so messy that I couldn't fit all my information onto a page, and so I ended up trying to figure out a way I could do it so that everyone could actually read it.
Oh, and it looks really good, but also I love you kind of dove into that emotions piece, you know, that thinking and that feeling, as well as all of the steps. So thank you so much for sending this out. Really appreciate it. So we have another one. Ali, who sent this one in?
This was Christine.
Christine. So I want to know from you, what did the map help you kind of identify? Did it give you any additional insights, or, you know, as well as like, what was the process like? Go ahead and unmute your mic.
I think what I wanted to do was to simplify it. So I realized I had a fairly complex problem, but I wanted to simplify what I was wanting to portray, and create a map that, you know, left unlimited possibilities, because I think it would have been really easy to create a map that was created boundaries, and I didn't want to do that. Yeah,
I love the images, by the way, of the trauma lightning bolt. Really great. And we have another one here that was sent to us, and he took a picture and emailed it. Really interesting map. I loved the way that. So this is a physician, Dr. John Alley, correct me if I'm wrong.
John, yeah.
In his problem, he was talking about prescription errors and errors within the system. And, you know, he really went with this map to kind of portray all of the steps, but as well as all of the different user groups that kind of interact with it. And as well, he had a little note that they actually may not be the same. So we identified roles, not necessarily just the people. Which was really a fantastic insight, even for me, because that's not something that I've even thought about during this medication process. And everyone kind of did these different maps, which is fantastic, right? It's not about having it be perfect. It's not about, you know, making sure you nail it the first time. It's just showing that journey of, you know, our user, and you know, really trying to experience what it may be like. So, Ali.
Hey. All right. So I am super thrilled to introduce our speaker, and he is from our southern neighbor from all the way from Texas. He's joining us. This is Lucas Artusi. to give you a bit of an idea of who he is, he works as a systems designer in Design Institute for Health. That Design Institute for Health is based in Austin, Texas. It's a one-of-a-kind kind of institute where it's a collaboration between a Dell Medical School and also the hospital there. And they have come up some great, amazing design kind of solutions. They just recently created a clinic with no waiting room. And we met him, Lucas, last year. We fell in love with him. He worked in IDEO. He's an engineer by background. And enough said, I think he's gonna blow us again with his amazing presentation. So over to you, Lucas.
Thank you for setting the bar nice and low for me. Well, howdy, everybody. I am Lucas, and I'm going to see if this works. Josh, do I have control of this?
You betcha. That's you, all you.
Okay. Oh, hey, that worked. Perfect. So I'm going to talk to you all today about analogous thinking, which is a tool or a method and a mindset, moreover, that we use quite a bit in the work that we do at the Design Institute. So the Design Institute is a partnership between the medical school and the College of Fine Arts at the University of Texas. We do design at all different scales and with all different sort of focuses. So product design, service design, environments design, all the way up to sort of systems and organizations design with a focus on health and healthcare. I am an alum of IDEO. I spent a couple of years there as a product designer, mostly working in the healthcare space. Healthcare is what I love, and I think it's one of the last frontiers of design. So it's an interesting and exciting place to be, and I'm happy to talk more about that during the Q&A part. If y'all have any questions along the way, stop me and ask. I don't like to monologue too much, so if there's a question that comes up, let me know. But if there are none, I'll just go ahead and dive in. So analogies. I'm going to show you this thing, which may or may not give you hives, depending on whether you've taken a standardized test before. But if you're familiar with this structure, it's part of the college entrance exams in the United States. But it's this framework for relating things, right? So an analogy is basically this thing is similar to that thing in a way that this other thing is similar to that other thing. And so, to break it down non-symbolically, here's the words that kind of go with it. And what's really interesting about analogies is that they help us relate ideas, and they're actually a really kind of old way of thinking, and I mean like old in the sort of biological evolutionary way, because we encounter situations all the time in the world, in the natural world and in the built world that humans have created. And oftentimes we leverage analogies subconsciously as a way to sort of encounter a new situation and say, this reminds me of something that I've seen before, and so I can learn it more quickly. And it's actually a survival tool that we've evolved. But it's a really powerful thing if you can harness it intentionally. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. So just to make sure everybody's on the same page with what analogies are, here's an example of an analogy. So a doctor is to a hospital as... Does anybody want to throw out what the answer is here? Maybe you want to take a guess at it? Yeah, it's C. And so what's interesting about this is that, you're all looking at this and you're saying, okay, well, so a doctor is in a hospital, right? We find doctors in a hospital, but we also find sports fans in a stadium. We find cows on farms. We find food in a grocery store. So what's specific about the doctor-hospital relationship, right? A doctor is a person, so that eliminates food from that list, right, compared to the other ones. And specifically, a doctor performs a job function in a hospital, which is why it's C, that a professor performs a job function at a college, and not A, which is a sports fan goes and attends an event at a stadium, right? So we use these all the time subconsciously, right? We relate things that we see to things that we already know to try to find patterns. And we do that because it's faster. It's faster than trying to learn everything new all over again. Any questions about that? Everybody on the same page? I promise that's the last pop quiz I'm going to give you today. So let's talk about analogies in design specifically. So when we use analogies in design, we use them for a few reasons, right? We use them to help inspire us. Because oftentimes we need a little jolt of inspiration, and we're not finding it in the place that we're in. They help us get unstuck, and this one's kind of paired with the one below, which is they attack our biases and blind spots. We all work in specific industries, in specific organizations, and we get inured to this sort of daily routine of things. And it's easy for us to kind of lose the thread of what it is that we're doing and what's unique about it and what's challenging about it. And so analogies can kind of help jar our thinking a little bit and get us thinking in a different way. They keep us from reinventing the wheel. There's nothing new under the sun, and most problems have been solved before, and not necessarily by your industry or your organization. And so analogies are great for seeing how other people have addressed the problem. Even if it's not exactly the same problem, a lot of the underlying components of it are similar. And to that end, it allows us to apply existing mental models elsewhere. And so this is where it gets really interesting, because people interact with certain services and products and things like that. And so they're really familiar with them. And if we can bring some of that familiarity into another industry, into the industry that we work in, we shortcut a lot of learning, and we also create more comfort, a sense of expertise, a sense of the person who's engaging, the user that's engaging, being the pro, which always creates a better experience. Any questions about that part? All right, moving on. So the fundamental question that you should ask yourself whenever you're trying to consider, an analogous situation is, where have I seen something like this before? And the something is the thing that you can kind of change up a little bit, right? The something could be, it could be a product, it could be a service that you've seen, it could be a situation. And so I'm going to run through a couple of examples of that to show you what I mean. So we did a project at Ideate several years ago that was around the emergency room. And so the emergency room is an extremely chaotic environment. Person comes in, oftentimes we don't specifically know what's wrong with that person. Sometimes because there's a language barrier, sometimes because they're actually too sick or too hurt to tell us what's wrong. There's a bunch of different, very specialized people in the room at the same time. There's a lot of really specialized equipment. There's huge time pressure. There's a lot of communications barriers that come up because that environment is so chaotic. And so this hospital system came to us and said, we have a bad situation here in terms of, what our operations are like in the emergency room. Can you help us figure it out? And these really complex systemic problems are hard to get started on, because, you look at it and you're like, well, I don't know which thread to start pulling on. And is it going to bring all the yarn together in a big knot, or is it going to untangle the knot, right? And so we started asking ourselves, okay, what's a similar situation to this? What's an environment where a patient comes in and we don't know what's wrong with them? And we have a bunch of specialized people and a bunch of specialized tools trying to solve a problem in a really, really time-constrained environment. Does anybody want to take a guess what we did, where we looked? IT, that's a good suggestion. It's not where we looked, but you can see the similarities there, right? There's a lot of complex equipment. Airports are another great example. So actually the answer is that we went to a car race. And the reason that we went to a car race to understand this is because you have a patient that comes in, that's the car. Oftentimes there's something wrong with the patient and it can't tell you what's wrong, right? And there's a bunch of very, very specialized people doing very specific jobs there. And it's a very, very high stress, time pressure environment. And so we went to understand how pit crews actually operate when a car comes in to repair parts that are broken or to try to troubleshoot something that's wrong with the vehicle. And we learned some really interesting things around the way that roles are defined. So everybody on the pit crew knows exactly what it is that they're supposed to be doing. We learned a lot about the equipment that they use. So, in a hospital emergency room, if I need to get a scalpel, I have to go to the scalpel drawer and pull out a scalpel. In a pit crew or in a pit situation in car races, things are kitted by the sort of need that exists. So if we need to replace an aerodynamic part that got smashed because we rubbed up against another car, there's a kit to do that that has everything that we need in it. If the problem is related to the suspension, then there's another kit that we use for that, and the tools are duplicated across both. And when we proposed that to the hospital system, they said, you got to be crazy, because we're not going to buy extra tools for everybody, right? Just to kit it separately. And what we said was, you'll actually gain on the time savings, because if somebody comes in with a gunshot wound, or they come in because they choked on a grape, I may need the same tool for both of those. And I don't want to have to go hunt that tool down. I want to be able to pull out my I'm choking on a grape kit, or I have to deal with the gunshot wound kit, and I want to be able to find a scalpel or whatever it is I need in both kits. The other thing that's interesting too is there's a person that's standing at the very front of the car that you see there that has that sort of sign with an arrow on it. And what that person's doing is actually, that person's watching everything else that's happening in the pit, right? And they're watching all of these things going on. They have to wait until every single person is finished with what they're doing and backed away from the vehicle before they pull that sign off and let the car go. And that's something that you're seeing a lot when you're operating now in a healthcare environment. So there's actually a model for CPR that's being leveraged a lot called the pit crew model of CPR, where there's actually one person who's not doing chest compressions and they're not ventilating a patient. They're literally standing there and watching the entire scene and making sure that everybody knows, or that everybody's doing the function that they're supposed to be doing. Because if I'm giving chest compressions and you're ventilating, neither one of us are really paying attention to what the other is doing. And so you need one person in that space that's integrating all of that information at the same time and making those decisions. A question came up, do you always look at different sectors when looking at analogies, or can you look within the same sector too? You can absolutely look within the same sector. There's a lot of value, I think, in going outside of the space that you're familiar with, because again, you have blinders and biases that you have from being in that space for so long. And so sometimes getting away from what it is that you're familiar with, getting that exposure, and then coming back to the space that you're familiar with is actually a really effective way of working. I'm going to keep going. So one of the very, very first projects that I worked on when I was at Ideate was with cows. And the way that cows are raised in the United States, basically these small independent farmers will have 5 to 10 cows on their property. And when the pickup truck needs a new engine or their daughter needs a prom dress, they sell a cow. And those cows get auctioned off and they get sort of clumped together into increasingly larger groups. And what ends up happening is these cows are all very young when they get auctioned off, because it's actually not economically favorable for them to raise a cow to full size on their own pasture. They should actually sell them when they're younger. So these cows, these young cows, get moved into these increasingly large groups, and then they eventually get moved onto these feedlots where they feed them a lot of grain and try to fatten them up really fast. What ends up happening that's interesting is that these cows are recently weaned. They miss mom. They're really stressed out. They're coming from all over the country. They get, put into these different groups and mixed up with these other cows. I don't know you, other cow. You don't know me. So we're stressing each other out. And they get one another sick. And they actually get a disease that's kind of similar to what in humans would be pneumonia. But they get this disease called bovine respiratory disorder. And it's actually bad for a lot of reasons. It's bad from an animal welfare perspective because the animal's suffering. It's bad from an economic perspective because the animal can't put on weight as fast when it's sick. And so it's not as profitable when we sell that animal. And there's also challenges in the United States around using antibiotics on animals. So when you use an antibiotic on a cow, that beef can no longer be sold as antibiotic free, which again impacts our bottom line. So there's a lot of challenges around using antibiotics in animals, and this really complex situation, lots of stakeholders, really confusing. So does anybody want to take a guess where we went and looked to get inspiration on this one? Lots of cows coming from different places, getting each other sick. Daycare. Yeah, that's exactly what we did. So we went to a daycare center because there's a lot of little cows that are away from mom. They're super stressed out. They're all of their faces are just leaking fluids all the time. They're getting one another sick. And so we spent a lot of time with this daycare center trying to understand, okay, when a kid comes in who's sick, how do we actually, how do you separate that kid off and make sure that they don't get all the other kids sick? How do you deal with the stress of all of these kids coming together and stressing each other out and being away from mom? And we actually applied a lot of those lessons that we learned from daycare and from the way that they quarantine kids while still, keeping them in the larger group. We applied a lot of what we learned to this particular piece of work. So next time you see your own kids or somebody else's kids, just think of them as little cows getting each other sick. And you cannot sell the kid as antibiotic free. That is correct. If you use antibiotics on them, that kid cannot be sold as antibiotic free. Graham, see me after class, please. I think we need to have a discussion. So I'm going to give an example, a more recent one. And George, I'll get back to your question in a second. I have not forgotten about you. So this is actually a picture from one of our clinics. And this is the clinic with no waiting room. And there's a lot of things about this space that are somewhat unique in healthcare. We use a back of house, front of house model, which is again an analog that we stole from the hotel industry because Nobody makes you walk through the kitchen and housekeeping when you check into a hotel to get to your room, but that's exactly what we do in healthcare, right? We march people through these very, very clinical spaces to get to their rooms. And then we wonder when we check their blood pressure in their room why it reads 20 or 30 points higher than it normally would. And everybody likes to talk about white coat syndrome, right? When the doctor walks in and it stresses the person out. But I would actually wager that a lot of that's actually driven by the environment. And so we use this back of house, front of house model where every room has 2 doors. And so the patient never crosses into a clinical space until they actually reach their room. And that keeps the anxiety level a lot lower. It also allows us to do interesting things with the space itself. So you can see carpeting in this space. That's something that you can't normally do in a clinical environment because of infection control, but because this is not a clinical space, this is the front of house space, we can actually use carpet here. So there's a lot of things that we stole from analogous spaces because it works, and why would we not do that? But I want to tell you a specific story of how we leveraged analogs here, which was around wayfinding. So the model that we have, the service model that we have, is that when somebody checks in, if their room is available, they go straight to their room. They don't actually stop anywhere. And so self-rooming is something that is apparently a dirty word in healthcare that we didn't know, because everybody had a conniption about it when we proposed it. And there were all these, there was much hand-wringing about like, well, how are people going to know how to get to their rooms, right? And it's not that complicated of a building, but like the way that the architects and the physicians and the operations people were talking about it, you would think that nobody had ever navigated an interior space before. And so all of these proposed solutions came up, and we were on a tight timeline to launch these clinics with a budget that we had to meet. And so all of these solutions came up about, well, let's leverage technology. Let's use real-time location tracking. Let's build custom applications with turn-by-turn navigation. So when someone's walking through the space, they'll have an arrow that shows them where to turn. All these other things. And we were like, you guys, we have, very few months left to open this clinic and not enough dollars to do all of that. And so again, we started thinking, what are other industries or what are other sectors that have done a really good job of getting people to really specific places at really specific times? Somebody want to guess what that is? By now you should be experts at this. You should be able to guess this one pretty fast. Yeah, airports. Yeah. So that's exactly what we did. We totally stole from airports because airports are phenomenally good at getting somebody to the right place at the right time, right? Because you don't want to miss your flight. And how do they do it? They do it with a boarding pass. And so that's exactly what we built for our clinics. We built the equivalent of a boarding pass. We call it a room guide for our clinics. This version that you see here is version 5. I think we're on version 7 now because in truly embodying the design mindset, we treat all of these as prototypes. But you can see it has a very limited set of information on it. It's your name and the floor, the hall, and the room number. And so if the person feels comfortable self-rooming, we write the floor that they're on, the hall that they go down, and the room number, and they navigate their way there. There's a lot of other stuff on here that we can get into around basically setting the scene for people because we follow a very different model in our clinics for the way that we operate. And so we did a lot of queuing in terms of what that experience would be like when they get to their room. But one thing that we also did was we created a perforated section at the bottom, just like on a normal boarding pass, and we duplicated the information. Why? Because nobody ever comes to these appointments alone, right? They're always coming with a family member or a friend or somebody else. And so we have that information duplicated so that we can write the floor, the hall, and the room number for both. And if you're with somebody, you can tear it off and give it to them. So if you don't want them in the room during the exam, or they don't want to be there, or they want to go get work done, they can actually leave that space and know where to come back to. Any questions about that part? So George, I think we're going to get to your question now, which is how do you consider the different places to look? And so we're going to run through a couple of examples and we'll sort of talk about the strategies around these. So as an example to start with, think about this particular situation, which is telling your doctor about an embarrassing problem. What does that remind you of? Like, what is a situation that you've encountered or that you know of that would be similar to this one? And you feel free to unmute yourself and shout it out or type it in or...
I'm not too sure. I'm going to be way off with this one, but it's like about telling my in-laws I got to move further away.
Yeah, that's a great example. And George said relationship troubles. That's totally what it's like, right? Like it's like telling somebody, something really deep and uncomfortable about yourself that you don't want to share with them. I'll give you one time we did this exercise and somebody said it's like asking your grandma to have the talk with you, the birds and the bees talk with you, which I thought was hysterical. We actually did a project when we were at IDEO that was around, it was with a pharmaceutical company that was working on a drug for irritable bowel syndrome. And they could not for the life of them figure out why nobody was getting this drug, because it was actually a really effective, pharmaceutical for treating IBS. And the response was like, how comfortable would you be talking about your bowel health with anybody, much less, a person that you don't know very well, right? And so as an analog for this, we actually took them to this very, very famous sex shop in San Francisco called Good Vibrations. And the reason that we took them there was because it's a place where you can have a conversation about something that's extremely personal in nature, but their approach is one where they're really positive about it. They're very open about it. The environment feels very clean and welcoming, right? They're experts. They're not pushy. They ask questions in a way that get you to say things that you wouldn't normally expect. So as an analog, that was actually a really effective tool for making them go, okay, so the problem is not that the drug doesn't work. The problem is that, we need different ways of having these conversations. Another example that we can run through. So getting somebody to quit smoking is like, anybody want to take a guess on this one?
It's really quiet. I'm gonna go with getting someone to lose weight, but that's really close, I think.
Yeah, close but not dissimilar, right? Getting you to stop biting your nails is another great example, right? The relationship one is actually not dissimilar here, right? Like getting somebody to quit smoking is like getting them to get out of a bad relationship. Getting somebody to stop eating carbs, getting your grandparents to understand technology, right? Like this is one of those really fascinating places where you can know that something is bad for you and do it anyway, right? And that's a really big challenge to overcome when somebody knows that something is not good for them, but they actually want to keep doing it. Like how do you have that conversation with them? And then I know I'm running short on time, so we're gonna go to the last one, which is delivering vaccines to a remote location during an epidemic is like. And this is a real problem, right? You have these firefighting is a great example. Yeah. Trying to find a lost child in a mall. That's an interesting one. I like that. Yeah. Like how do you get that person back to the place that they need to be, the exact, in this really chaotic environment? Trying to drive a full bucket of water across town without spilling a drop. Yeah, that's totally true. There's actually an organization that started with a bunch of Coca-Cola executives where they actually leveraged the supply chain for delivering Coca-Cola to deliver vaccines to rural locations, because the cold chain that they developed to deliver Coca-Cola products to places that were way off the beaten path was actually equally effective for delivering vaccine doses, right? And so thinking about those things like, what's another sector that's figured out this problem already? You have to get something cold to some place, that's far away. Who's really good at doing that already? Well, Coca-Cola is great at doing it. So what can we learn from them? And can we actually just leverage the infrastructure that they've already built? So that's the power of thinking with analogs and design. And I don't want to go over time, so the guys will probably give me the hook here. But I do want to give a caution before we go, which is that these analogies and the mental models that they're leveraging can be really culturally dependent. So think hard when you're trying to apply these sort of similar mental models. What of that is very Western in nature? What of it is specific to particular socioeconomic groups? Because the last thing that we want to do in design is to actually make somebody feel like they're on the outside of it. So thinking really hard about, what's the mental model that I'm trying to leverage here, and is it true for everybody? And then the last thing that I'll leave you with on here is, see if it'll click through. So this is what I'm going to leave you with, your turn. So I want you to think about a challenge that you're currently tackling, and I want you to ask yourself the question, is there a particular role or a process or an object or a situation or some other factor that reminds me of something that I've seen elsewhere, right? Like, where have I seen this problem before? Who might also have this problem? And what can that analogous role or process or object or situation or other factor teach you about what it is that you're working on? So in the same way that Coca-Cola can teach us something about getting cold things to faraway places, what's the problem that I'm dealing with and who may have encountered it before? And let's go talk to that person. Let's go see how they do it. Let's go put ourselves in that experience so that we can understand firsthand what that's like. And that's all I got. So that's how to follow along with the work that we're doing in sunny Austin, Texas. Guys, do I have time to answer a couple of questions if people have them? Or
Sure, no, for sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So Katie asked, are there tips for peeling back the layers to get to the crux of the issue? That's a really, really good question. And it's actually, there's a similar thing you can do when you write How Might We's for brainstorming. So we were talking about brainstorming before we got here, which is, if you're having a hard time figuring it out, you may be at the wrong level, right? The problem may be too abstract or too concrete. And if it's too concrete, I think that there's a way to sort of strip away some of those things that are constraining you, overly constraining you. If it's too abstract, you want to do the opposite. You want to apply some constraints to it. I think another way to do it is to just inspire, like be voraciously curious and get inspired. And so that'll help you start to see those patterns as they emerge. I think if you can start to break things down in terms of like roles and responsibilities and processes and measurements and things like that, if you can sort of like get to those little nuclei that can help you figure out, oh, okay, this role that I see here is similar to this role that exists in this other industry. Let's try to find the connections between the two. So rather than just look at like the entire, like what does the emergency room experience look like? Like, let's break that thing down. What are the roles that are in place there? Well, somebody's doing the diagnostic stuff. Somebody's, doing the immediate treatment stuff. Somebody's, facilitating all the communications. What are the processes that are being used there? Well, there's a triage process where we try to find out what's wrong with that person. There's some kind of treatment that happens. There may be imaging that happens, right? So like, what are the processes that are going on there? What are the tools which are being used? So the more you can start breaking that problem down a little bit, instead of just saying like, oh my God, how do we think about an analog for emergency rooms? Break it down into its component parts and start thinking, okay, what does this kind of remind me of? Like, what's a similar situation to this where there's a person doing this thing, or there's a tool that's needed here, or these steps are sort of, sequenced in a similar way.
Thanks, Lucas. I wanted to, I'm thinking is let's jump into our, actually, we just have one more question coming from Kareem. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so do we look at analogies that have not been as successful so we know elements to potentially avoid? Yeah, absolutely, right? Like the last thing you should do is repeat somebody else's mistake. That, as a not directly designed challenge related thing, but you look at what's happening in the aviation industry right now and a lot of the problems that are happening there. That's a great place to look, right? And there's a lot of really interesting examples around like human-computer interaction and the way that people deal with these sort of complex streams of information that we've learned from the aviation industry that we've applied in other places. So Atul Gawande's checklist manifesto is straight out of aviation, right? It's straight out of crew resource management. If you look at like control theory and the way that we control things, part of what brought down that Airbus flight that was flying, or that Air France flight that was flying between Brazil and France, was actually a problem with the controls where, one person would input one control and the other person would input the opposite control, and it doesn't average them out, and it doesn't tell the other person what that person is inputting, right? And so they were giving the plane two different commands. And that's something that happens all the time in manufacturing and stuff like that, where you can get two dissimilar inputs and the system just goes, all right, I'm going to pick one. And if it's the input that you're trying to give it, then you get the result that you want. And if you're giving the opposite input, then you're going to be really upset with what the result is. And so, you should absolutely look at where things are breaking in other places so you don't break it in the same way. You get to break it in a different way and somebody gets to learn from you.
Amazing. Lucas, you've blown our mind. And I wish I could just let you talk for the whole hour, but we just have to start moving on. Again, Lucas, please stay on if you want to, but we're going to appreciate you so much for this amazing. This is the first time actually I've learned about analogous thinking. I don't think I've ever heard about this before. So this is amazing, and it'll really help us to move into our next segment, talking about our sprint.
My pleasure. Happy to help.
Thank you again, Lucas. Folks, why don't we just move on? I just want to be mindful of the time. So as you guys know, getting back to our healthcare sprint that we're talking about, this is the schedule you've seen. So we're now right after lunch, when you're doing your day one sprint, we're jumping into the ideation piece. And in that ideation piece, we're really looking at is getting some inspirations from comparable solutions, and then jumping into really generating ideas for your problem. So what I'm going to talk about is we're going to move into the comparable solutions. They're very similar to what Lucas talked about, but in the sprint day, what we're doing is, next slide, please. We're really using an opportunity for about, we usually say 15, 20 minutes for people to share some ideas that they think would be great for inspiration for solving your problem. So using from different industries like technology, sports, healthcare, people do like quick 2-3 minute presentations saying, okay, this industry has solved this problem using this kind of way. Or another one, we love this idea or solution that came out and how they're solving a very similar problem like us that we're doing in the sprint. And that gives people a little bit of generating some ways of, okay, what other people are doing, can we get inspired from them? Can we even plagiarize a little bit from their idea and make it even better? And so that's kind of the comparable solutions we do. And then we jump into the real fun stuff, which is Crazy Eights.
So we talked about why brainstorming kind of sucked, and it was, you know, we heard a lot about the hippo in the room, the highest paid person's opinion. We heard a little about introverts versus extroverts, and the design sprint has recipe pieces that help you kind of circumvent these problems. And the first one's called Crazy Eights. So really what we do is we get a legal sized piece of paper, the big one, 8.5 by 14. See, I can remember the actual dimensions, but not actually its name. I think it's legal. And we fold it up into these 8 squares. So kind of fold it once, fold it again, and then one more time. And you open it up and you end up with these 8 squares. And we really time box this piece. We give them 1 minute per square. It's heavily facilitated, and they draw out their idea using as little words as possible. We try to get them to actually use no words. But a lot of the times, physicians or people who are really high up in the food chain have a hard time with this kind of creative aspect. But everybody can draw. I always say, our great ancestors, the first form of communication was through symbols, right? So we try to get them to kind of harness that energy and do that. And they write down 8 of their ideas, and they all don't need to be amazing. It's not the point. But we know as we've gone through the morning, they've got something in their head and they start to want to put it down on paper. After we do this, so you got 8 minutes, 1 minute per square, we cut them off and we get them to kind of look at their drawings and reflect on them. And, over half of them are going to be not great, or almost, as one of our teammates will say, they're really crappy. But there is there's one idea that they think that this is really something that I love, and it's going to be truly innovative or different, that we're not used to doing within our work. We get them to pick just one, and we do more drawing. We allow for more words now, but we get them to build what's called a solution sketch. It's this 3-panel, almost a story about how the user kind of interacts with your solution, or how is your solution going to work. So it can look a little bit like this. So remember the elderly loneliness sprint I talked about? This was one of the solution sketches that someone did. As you can see, they leaned heavily on the more words and less drawing. So as a facilitator, you can push people to draw as much as you want. But at some point, they'll rely back on their old way of working. But a good way of encouraging them is, if a picture tells 1,000 words, you have 8,000 words worth of all of your ideas on a page, and there's no way you'll be able to do that in 8 minutes. So we try to encourage them to do that and to draw. But they come up with this solution sketch. So there's the 3 panels. It's kind of the beginning. How does your user interact or start with your idea? The middle, what is it like to experience? And then the last one could be the end. And this, of course, we leave some room for interpretation, but we always go at that beginning, the middle, and the end. And we give more time for this. We kind of want them to get a little bit into the details. So the Crazy 8 was kind of the what. What is their idea? And we tell them, don't worry about the how. And now this one, it's more of the how. We get into the minutia, a little bit of how it's going to work. And so every member of the sprint process sprint team is going to have one, because they go through this process. So they write notes, they get their ideas, draw them out in their Crazy Eights, and then create their solution sketch. So if you have 8 members on a sprint team, you're going to have all of these ideas. And we get them to present them. We kind of some people call it a gallery, and where we get everybody to come up, they tape their idea to the wall, and then they do like a really quick pitch, like 2 minutes. This is what I want to do. middle, or, start, middle, end, and then that's it. And there's nobody providing any input. There's really no Q&A. They just present it, and then they go back and sit down. Everybody goes through it, and then we vote. So note and vote. This is how we come to decisions quickly, and it's not about consensus building. It's just picking, the good enough. What do we want to build? What do we want to work on? It happens right after everybody presents their sketches. So this person definitely didn't draw, but they had a really amazing pitch to the team. Everyone started to kind of gravitate to this. And you'll see there's different colored dots. For this one, we ended up having a user there to hear the pitches. So I wanted them to have a vote around the idea. We also have blue dots. So blue dots are kind of the element of an idea. What's something that they really, really like, that maybe they don't like the whole thing, but they like the piece of it. And the red dot is for I like the whole idea. I like everything that's here, and this is something that we need to build on. And so after this quick voting session, and of course everything is kind of done in silence, we go through and let everyone kind of reflect on these solution sketches. And then now we've got this best idea, and it allows us to move into the prototyping stage. But I want to do a breakout because there's been a lot of talking, and we met with Lucas a little bit before we started the day, and he had this fantastic question. We want to hear from you guys. What was the best idea that you've ever had to let go of, not off? So what is something you thought, like, I'm going to this brainstorming session, or I want to take this to my leader, or this is something I want to implement and do, and you got axed and you had to stop, or you were told that you can't implement this. So Ali, you ready to go with those rooms? Oh, look at that. He's on it every time. So we're going to break out, guys. Ali, how many minutes?
You guys 5 minutes? Yeah.
5 minutes. Perfect.
You think about a situation that was like that?
Just trying to think, because I'm just trying to think of a general situation, because I've not worked in a field like this. I come from an IT background, just programming, so I'm just trying to think back in that, like someone else can start it and I'll jump in.
Well, I've definitely had them, but I have a tendency to never accept no. So it gets parked and then I come back at it. I have one right now. I'd really like to create an app around privacy and security at AHS, and I'm just not getting enough traction. But I think it's always timing, so I just got to park it, and I keep slowly bringing it back. So I'm not one to take no very easily.
That's good. And sometimes, it's not no, it's just not right now.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing the difference between those is sometimes a tricky balance to strike.
I had one time I was facilitating a sprint and I was helping them with an idea, and one of the ideas for the people were like, they were absolutely convinced that they needed a committee as a solution. I'm not joking, as part of this. And I'm like, that's not an idea. And and we came to this very intense debate. And then I said, okay, you know what? Let's take it to the users. We'll let the users kibosh it, and if they like it, fine. If we don't like it, and exactly that's what happened. We went to the prototyping testing phase. Not even a single user said, nope, no committees, please. We don't want, and that's how we hashed out that really crappy idea. Right? When in doubt, just let the user speak.
That's great.
That gets to a really big challenge, right? Which is, how do you, nobody likes to be told that their baby is ugly. And so managing that conversation with somebody that's holding on really tenaciously to an idea, and how do you get them to release that just enough? And also, a lot of times there's a kernel of a good idea there, right? But some people only have hammers in their toolboxes, and so everything just looks like a nail. And if your hammer has been committees, then that's the only tool that you're ever going to reach for. But there's always some like key need that they're trying to solve. They may just not have a better tool to solve it with. But if you hand them a screwdriver instead, then they get to have a really different conversation.
I was taking his analogy and your comment of the ugly baby and imagining a beauty contest. I wasn't. Congratulations, you have the ugliest baby.
Yeah, I guess you just have to let go sometimes. I mean, in some of my work, I've just had to let go and, let people experience it and then realize that it was not the right solution, really.
Yep, that's exactly it.
We should be joining back in about 15 seconds, guys.
Thanks.
Bye. Everyone should be joining back in. Okay, we got perfect. Anyone wants to share what they talked about? What was the best idea you had to let go of?
I want to pick on Alex from my group.
So my idea was so I work in provincial seniors health. Accessing rural communities is very difficult. So one of my ideas was to use drones for medication delivery and, also delivery of lab samples to and fro. Idea I had to let go of for numerous reasons, but I think it's still going to happen. Just maybe not right now, but yeah.
We talked about the same thing in our breakout room, which is like, no doesn't mean never. And so keep at it. So, this was a quick breakout room, but I think this is something very real that we experience as part of being innovative thinkers. We just have to keep going. So what we have done really is now, when you've done your Crazy 8 solution sketches, you've picked the idea, we've really gone from diverging and thinking all about these different ideas and converge to a solution that you all guys feel confident in saying, hey, this is a solution that we feel this is going to work really well. And we voted on it, and we have made another big decision as a group. And so this is where kind of your ideation session would end, and you move into the prototyping phase. And so this is almost at the end. We're now going to just close off. We have exactly on time. I just want to say the final takeaways again for today was, seek inspiration from other industries, analogous thinking like Lucas was talking about, and then go for quantity when you do Crazy 8s. And we encourage that because first you got to get a lot of ideas to get a good one. And then really using solution sketches and voting to come up together as to vote for your best idea. As mentioned, every week we have an activity for the week. This time we're going to get you guys to ideate about your solution, your personal challenge that you've been having. And in our workbook, you'll see we've been nice enough to create already 8 squares for you, so you don't have to fold it up. We super encourage you to really draw, not write, come up with ideas, and you can build as many as you want. And again, put it on Twitter on #SprintSchool or send it us. And again, Josh and I are available to answer any of your questions. And for next week, we're going to have another guest speaker, and he's all the way from Netherlands. Robin, I have a very hard time pronouncing Hoosier, and he is coming in talking about storyboarding and building the prototype. And it's going to be another fun session next week. So that's all from both me and Josh. And again, thank you, Lucas, for this amazing presentation. Thank you, everyone, for keeping us, we're 11:01 now. Okay, I'm going to stop. Okay.
We're overtime.
Overtime.
So, like usual, you guys, if you guys have any questions about anything, hit us up on Twitter, send us a DM. Make sure you tag us in your things, take a picture